All right, hello, Algebra 2. This is lesson 6.4, solve by completing a square. So yesterday we learned how to find that value of c that makes a perfect square quadratic. And so if you remember, that value of c we got by doing b divided by 2 quantity squared. And that's definitely something we want to remember. That's c for complete the square, and it's a good one to know. So if I want to do that for this little trinomial here, then it is this b value, which is 11, divided by 2 and squared. And of course, 11 divided by 2 doesn't go evenly, but the fraction is actually easier to square anyway. 11 squared is 121, and 2 squared is 4. So this perfect square quadratic, or perfect square trinomial, is x squared plus 11x plus 121 over 4. And that's what we did in the previous lesson. And then, of course, once you have that, we could double bubble it and write it as a binomial square, which is really useful, and that's what we're going to do today. So today we're going to solve quadratic equations by completing the square. And you have IXL K10. This is kind of an involved process, but hopefully you'll do it enough and realize it's actually pretty easy. So example 1, solve by completing the square. Answers should be integers. This is a good time to talk about integers. Integers are the positive and negative whole numbers. So -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, and 3, ... Those are all integers, positive and negative whole numbers. They should be fractions, that's fine, or decimals rounded to the nearest hundredths. And so we're going to do that. We're going to round our answers because everything you'll be able to do on your calculator. So if it comes to it, we can use our calculator and get some decimals, but maybe we won't need to. So solve by completing the square is a very interesting process. And so right here in the middle, I'm going to write our little procedure for completing the square. And so the first thing we want to do is make sure that the number in front of x squared is 1. And in this case, it is a 1. If it weren't, we would want to divide through THROUGH, good spelling, by a, whatever that a value happens to be. So we don't need to do that for this one. But if it came up, the first thing we would want to do is get rid of whatever number is in front of the x squared, and we could divide everything by that number. Then the second thing is to isolate the x squared and x term on one side of the equal sign. So that's what we're going to do first here. I'm going to go ahead and use a different color so my procedure doesn't get mixed in. I want to take this constant term and move it to the other side. And then, so in order to move it, I have to change the sign. So I'm going to subtract 8 to move it over. What I'm going to do then is leave a blank space. Okay, so that's the third step. So the first thing we're going to do here, I've moved my 8 to the other side, so I have x squared plus 6x equals -8. And you see how I left some room here. What we need to do is we're trying to figure out what c is. And so I want to add a blank space, and that's the c value that we found yesterday. That's what we're doing today. So blank spaces for the c. Now, why do I have to add a blank space on the left side of the equals and the right side of the equal sign? This is an equation, and in order to keep it balanced, if I add something to the left side, I also need to add it to the right side to keep the scales balanced. All right, so C. So the fourth step is to find C. All right, so C is the C value we found yesterday. So C is B divided by 2. So in this case, 6 divided by 2 squared. 6 divided by 2 is 3. And if we square that, that equals 9. So then we're going to find C and add it to both sides. So we added that C value into both sides. Find C and add to both sides. Okay. From there, we can factor the trinomial. Double bubble. Okay, so we're going to double bubble that left-hand side. So x squared plus 6x plus 9 factors as x times x is x squared. What times what is positive 9? 3 times 3. That's also where we get the 6. And condense it. So we can factor and condense it so that it's a quantity squared, which is really nice. So there's our left-hand side. On the right-hand side, we're going to combine our constants here. So negative 8 plus 9 gives me a 1. And then this is now quantity squared. So I can use the square root method to solve. And that's the last step. Use the square root method to solve. So we're really combining everything that we've been doing, which is really kind of cool. So we're going to take a square root of both sides now. So I'm going to take the square root of the left and the square root of the right. Don't forget the plus or minus, very important. The square root and the square cancel one another out, and it just leaves what's inside, which is just the x plus 3. Super, super awesome. And then we have the square root of 1, which is 1. So we get plus or minus 1. And then I just need to get x by itself. So I'm not add 3, I'm going to subtract 3. So subtract 3, and that means I have negative 3 plus or minus 1. So there's 2 things here. We're not done. So we get 2 answers. We get negative 3 plus 1. Well, negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2. We have another answer, negative 3 minus 1, which is negative 4. So there's 2 answers here, negative 2 and negative 4, which is kind of cool. All right, let's do the same thing. More practice. Good amount of practice today. So the first step is to divide through by a. A is the number in front of the x squared, and it's a 1. I could divide through by 1, but I won't change anything. We want to isolate the x squared and x term. The x squared and the x term are already alone on the left-hand side. So all I need to do is start with step 3, which is leave blank spaces for C. So I have x squared minus 4x, and I'm going to insert a blank space. Equals negative 13. And remember, if I add a C on the left-hand side, I also need to add that C value to the right. So C is negative 4 over 2 quantity squared. So it's negative 2 quantity squared, which means, now this is the tricky part, so make sure you get this right. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. So we're going to add that 4 value to both the left and the right sides of the equation. And now the 5th step is to factor the trinomial. And so we're going to take this trinomial, 1, 2, 3, trinomial, and we're going to double bubble it. You can skip this step if you want to, but I like to do it mostly because it has meaning. X times x is x squared, and what times what is positive 4? Negative 2 times negative 2 gives me a positive 4. And when we add, that's where that middle term comes from. So check the rainbow to get the middle term. And condense it to a binomial square. And then I can combine my negative 13 and positive 4, which is a negative 9. Okay. Last thing, use the square root method to solve. So I'm going to go ahead now and take a square root of both sides. The square root and the square cancel out. Don't forget the plus or minus. So we get x minus 2 equals plus or minus. Now this is the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 9. Square root of negative 1 is I. Square root of 9 is 3. So we get 3 times I, or 3I. And then I just need to isolate x by adding 2. Now, can I add 2 to the 3? I don't get 5 i's. That's not how that works. They are not like terms. So this 2 just gets inserted in there. We're going to say 2 plus or minus 3i. So that's the short way to write it, but we want in IXL to list things. So the list here is, whoops, we would say 2 plus 3i, comma, 2 minus 3i. All right, so I think you separate with commas in IXL. So keep that in mind. 2 solutions, and these are 2 imaginary solutions. Here we have 2 real solutions. All right, a little bit harder. Again, the first step is to divide through by a. You see that we have a leading number here in front of the x squared, and that's not allowed. So we want to go ahead and divide every single term by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So that's how we get 1x squared. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2x. And 6 divided by 2 is 3. The second step was isolate the x squared and the x term. And you can see that they're already alone on the left-hand side. So good. And then we're going to add the blank spaces. Add c to both sides. So let's figure out c. C is negative 2 over 2 quantity squared. Negative 2 over 2 is negative 1 quantity squared. And negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. So we're going to add 1 to both sides. Then the next step is to double bubble the left-hand side, or double bubble the trinomial. X times x is x squared. What times what is positive 1? Negative 1 times negative 1 gives me positive 1. The rainbow gives me negative 2. Condense. And 3 plus 1 gives you 4. I'm sorry, I'm hearing my son in the background getting rather excited about something. All right, so now we've condensed it to a quantity squared, which means we can use the square root method. So we're going to square root both sides. Don't forget the plus or minus. The square root and the square cancel out, leaving x minus 1 equals, here we have plus or minus, and what's the square root of 4? 2. Then I just need to move the 1 to the other side. So I get positive 1 plus or minus 2. That is not complete. You need to actually figure out what the answers are. In this case, since we can, 1 plus 2 would give me 3. 1 minus 2 gives me negative 1. So 2 possible answers. We can take an answer and plug it in, and it should work in the equation. All right. Last one here. Again, we have a number in front of the variable squared. So we need to go ahead and divide everything by negative 2. And that's going to give me r squared. 34 divided by negative 2 is negative 17. And then 24 divided by negative 2 is negative 12. Then isolate the r squared and the r term. So it's already by itself. That's good. And we're going to go ahead and add in some blank spaces to figure out c. C is negative 17 divided by 2 quantity squared. I don't know what that is. But I do know that 17 squared is 289, I believe. 17 times 17, I think, is 289. I can never quite remember if it's 189 or 289. So 17 times 17 is positive 289. And then 2 squared is 4. Eek. So 2, you know what? I'm just going to write a decimal. I can do that. It's totally fine. 289 divided by 4 is 72.25. All right. 72.25. So you can use your calculator. It's totally okay to do that. And then we're going to go ahead and double bubble. Now, for double bubbling, that's 72.25. It doesn't actually help me very much. R times R is R squared. What times what is 289 over 4? Well, negative 17 halves and negative 17 halves is how we got the 289 over 4. And if you want, 17 divided by 2 is 8.5. So you could use 8.5. Let's do that. So that is really R minus 8.5 quantity squared. So remember, 17 divided by 2 is really just 8.5. Equals 72.25. And this is where we're going to use our calculators now. And go ahead and take a square root of both sides. Don't forget the plus or minus. The square root and the square cancel out. And I'm left with R minus 8.5 equals plus or minus the square root of 72.25. And I'm going to go ahead and move my 8.5 to the other side. I'm going to insert it. Again, it doesn't combine with the 72.25 because this number is under a radical and this one is not. So they don't get put together. So we have 8.5 plus or minus the square root of 72.25. And this is something I have to do in my calculator because I don't know the square root of 72.25. Oh, I didn't even do it right. Oh, Lord. I'm so sorry. I was like, wait a minute. I do know the square root of 72.25. I did that wrong. What did I do wrong, ladies and gentlemen? Where is my mistake? Right here, I didn't combine those. So negative 12 plus 72.25 is 60. Oh, boy. I'm glad I caught that mistake. I would have realized there was a problem in the answer. All right. So my apologies. All right. So negative 12 plus 72.25 gives me 60.25. And now I'm going to go ahead and just type this expression in my calculator to get my two answers. So we're going to do 8.5 plus the square root of 60.25, and I get 16.26. Now they said round to the nearest hundredth, so that's good. And then I'm going to do 8.5 minus the square root of 60.25. You do need to know how to use your calculator. So that rounds up to 0.74 if I'm rounding to the hundredths position. So those are our two values. And if I wanted to, I could take them and square them. I rounded them off, so it's not exactly going to equal 24, but it would be close. Just to show you, to check, you would want to check both of them. I'm just going to go ahead and plug in the 0.74 to the original. So I'm going to plug in 0.74 and square it, and plus 34 times 0.74. And let's see what it equals, because it should equal 24. It's not going to be exact. Why is it not going to be exact? That's right, because we rounded it off. I know you said that because I heard you through time and space. And you can see that it's approximately 24.06, yada, yada, yada. That is close enough. We rounded off, and so it's not going to be exactly 24. So we're pretty close there. But that's a good way to double check. You can always take an answer and plug it back in. Hint, hint on test day. Hint, hint, hint. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the process for completing a square. And now you can go practice it on IXL K10.